This afternoon and tonight, Valentine's Day, much drier. I'm KIRO 7 Pinpoint meteorologist Nick Allard.
Scattered showers in the area. Right now, cloudy downtown and 41 degrees. I'm Lisa Brooks.
Subscribe to us on YouTube for our can't miss clips. KIRO Radio 97.3 FM with Tom and Curly now on your drive home.
From the Carter Subaru Studios, this is the G and Ursula Show with G. Scott and Ursula Reutin.
Welcome back to the G and Ursula Show. This is a Thursday. G is off for a couple of days, and we have Feliks Banel co-hosting with me today. Good morning.
Glad to.
Up on the show, Secretary of State Kim Wyman's going to be joining us around 10:30 to talk about the first relevant presidential primary in our state's history. But right now, we are going to talk to the one man who can say what is going to happen to the two suspects from that downtown Seattle shooting last month. Okay, the vocals you're hearing right there come from King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg, who we are honored to say is joining us right here in studio. Thank you for coming in.
Ursula, it's good to be here with you.
We really appreciate it. Feliks wanted to make sure that we know that you were in a band.
That's the Approximations. Is that who that is?
That is. That's my rock band. I've been lucky to be with that group for about 20 years now, and it's good to have friends who are better musicians. That's my secret.
Well, we are going to jump right in, and I know that you, Dan, have wanted to talk about this. The latest this morning is that the downtown Seattle shooting suspects who were accused of opening fire on that rival gang member are now back in King County Jail. Marquise Tolbert and William Tolliver were extradited from Las Vegas. They're now going to be facing murder and assault charges. One of those suspects had 3 felony convictions in March of 2019, spent less than a year in jail. The other had 1 felony conviction also in March for illegal possession of a firearm, also spent less than a year in jail. And at the press conference following the downtown Seattle shooting, Mayor Durkin was asked why felons were spending so little time in jail, and here's part of her answer.
I have to say for SPD, they are doing a great job at their job at arresting people. Once we arrest people, the system becomes diffuse depending on whether it is a misdemeanor or felony.
Which is why isn't a King County prosecutor representative here then? We've got municipal, but we don't have county.
And I don't really answer that because I didn't put together, but I'm sure that Dan Satterberg would be happy to answer some of these questions.
So Dan, we have you here.
And Jenny's right. I'm happy to answer your question.
Okay. What happened in this case? Why were these 2 men still out on the streets?
Well, one, as you mentioned, was convicted of a robbery and unlawful gun possession, and the standard range sentence for that is a year and a day in prison, and so he spent a year and a day in prison. The other spent time in jail for illegal gun possession. They have a long misdemeanor history, and a lot of the arrests, and I heard on, I think maybe the chief of police had said they'd been arrested 25 or 50 times.
I think 60 between them.
Yeah, we went and looked at that. You have to understand that most of what they did were shoplifts. They're serial shoplifters, and they also have domestic violence in their past. And a lot of the arrests are because they didn't show up for court. When you don't show up for court, and they were charged all over Pierce County, Lakewood, Linwood, Kitsap, so they're all over the place in Bellevue. They did some shoplifts over in the Bellevue Square. You're charged with a misdemeanor. If you don't come to court, then the judge issues an arrest warrant, and you get arrested on that, and then they hold you in jail until you can come before that misdemeanor judge. So a lot of the arrests were because they didn't show up. They probably lost track of how many places they'd been charged with misdemeanor crimes. But one of the truths of the system, and I'm here because I'm excited about your show, and because I think we can have an intelligent conversation about what actually people should expect from the court system. In misdemeanor courts, you don't get a lot of time in jail, and cities don't want to pay for somebody to be in jail for a year when they've shoplifted something. So it's a series of court appearances, convictions, maybe a brief time in jail if you didn't show up for court and you got picked up on a warrant. And it's only when you get to felony land that we start talking about prison time. And even then, it takes a certain number of felony convictions under our state sentencing law to get to the prison as opposed to the jail.
So if we talk about that, because again, it's like, okay, so if it's only misdemeanors, is it time to revisit, what penalties would be for some of these misdemeanors, especially for these people who are doing it 20 and 30 times?
So the King County prosecuting attorney and every county prosecutor has felony jurisdiction, has
And
juvenile jurisdiction, and then misdemeanor jurisdiction in unincorporated parts of the county and also on the freeways. We do a lot of DUI practice from I-5 and I-90, those sorts of things. So what happens in city courts is very inconsistent. You might get a different sentence in Kent Municipal Court than you would in Seattle Municipal Court. It really is a lot of factors that go into that. So it's not a matter of just saying we're going to change all misdemeanor courts. There's actually hundreds of them in the state.
Well, looking at the broader picture, Seattle does have a repeat offender problem. So last year, the Downtown Seattle Association released that report showing that the 100 prolific offenders were responsible for a majority of the crimes. Most of them were homeless, drug addicted. After their release from jail, 90 out of 100 of them reoffended within 9 months. How do you respond to complaints about the justice system simply being a revolving door?
Well, I understand that frustration, and again, I poured through that report, and only about 10% of those cases, so those individuals had felony cases in my office. I think we just need to understand what the inherent limitations of the court system are. And in felony prosecutions, we do prosecute people for what we call minor felonies, and you get enough of those, and then you have points, and those points follow you around until you commit a crime serious enough to go to prison. And prison's where we send people when they serve a sentence of more than a year, and jail would be less than a year. What happens in high volume within the city attorney's office, and I can't speak to that, I'm not the city attorney.
And we plan to have the city attorney on as well. We will invite him.
They have a high volume of cases, and the misdemeanor courts are high volume courts, and so I don't know that they have an ability to necessarily enact the kinds of sentences that people wish they would. You know, so much in the conversations I have with people, and this frustration is real, and it's legitimate. But a lot of times people express a desire about a justice system that they wish we had, and not the one that we actually have. So I'm here to tell you about the one that we actually have.
And is there, stepping aside from the legal stuff for a second, is there some social deterrent or some disincentive that should have sort of flagged these two guys with all their various misdemeanors at the civic level and then the felonies at the district level that would have flagged them for being a danger for killing somebody?
So these young men, and I'm not going to talk too much about them. We do have
for being accused of shooting somebody.
But what this was an act of retaliatory urban gun violence. Right, the two groups of young men who are identify with different gangs, probably some social media posts that sparked this as well, where they and when they see each other, it's a fight on sight, and they happen to see each other outside of the McDonald's at 3rd and Pine. So it isn't. And there was an immediate conflation with this act of urban gun violence with homelessness, drug addiction, social chaos that comes with really this extraordinary moment that we have here in the country and the West Coast for sure, with open and obvious homelessness and really human misery and despair. That didn't have anything to do with this case. These guys, and I have to go on evidence, there's no evidence these guys were dealing drugs. They don't have drug dealing history in their background. That's not why they were downtown. But when they saw each other, they did what they it didn't take much for words to then lead to guns being pulled out. And it was terrible. And it was, I've seen the video and I've looked at the evidence. It's awful. And we've charged them with reckless disregard for human life because of the way they fired about 24 bullets in a very crowded area. As they ran away, they were firing the gun behind them. And so it obviously they didn't care who it hit. So they're facing 1 count of first-degree murder and 6 counts of assault 1, and so it's a very long sentence. And to talk about the things that we do well in the King County Prosecutor's Office, we respond to violent crime. We had deputy prosecutors on the scene. I had deputy prosecutors who were working with local different police departments to find the cell phones that helped us locate them in Las Vegas. So my attorneys were on this case from the beginning, and were very critically responsible in bringing these people back, and now we will prosecute them, and we will do it constitutionally, and we will give them a sentence that protects the public. But going upstream and saying, was there something about these these three guys that would have allowed us to do some sort of preventative detention? That's just not the way the system works. When they were caught, they were punished for the things that they did.
One of the complaints that I hear quite a bit of is that the drug crisis that we have, and the ability to have open air drug dealing, especially in the downtown core, that has also helped the gang situation that we have. You made national headlines in 2011 when you announced that you support the decriminalization of less than 2 grams of controlled substances. And I know that you were spurred by something personal. What was that?
Well, let me clarify what our standard is
Okay.
right now. And I do think when you talk about the things that the court system does well, and the things that we are inherently have limitations on, we are not a place that is designed to help people recover from drug addiction. With one exception of drug court, and in our drug court, we have people who are facing more serious charges. They're all facing several years in prison. We have a good system there that provides housing and support and counseling for people. It's stuff that people need to succeed, the stuff that you and I need to succeed, a place to live and some hope in their life. Our drug court does that for 350 people. But obviously our drug problem in the community is much bigger. So we have to have lots of different strategies. Sure. I also want to say, I don't talk about solutions to this problem anymore. I want us to be authentic and say we have strategies. We have choices to make about things we can invest in. We can invest a whole bunch of money into the criminal justice system and say, let's lock up people who have drug addictions. And we did that. We did that in the 80s. I've been a prosecutor now for 35 years, and when I started in 1985, that's when crack cocaine started to come to town. And pretty soon we went from 400 cases a year to 4,000 drug cases a year. We built and filled prisons in the 90s. In fact, we tripled our prison population in Washington and went from 6,000 to 18,000. And at some point in the 90s, more than a quarter of the people in prison were there for a drug offense. So we did that. And frankly, if prosecuting people who had a drug addiction worked, we wouldn't have a drug problem today because we've done this tens and hundreds of thousands of times for people. So what we do well in the drug court, that's one situation. But prosecuting people who have tiny amounts of drugs is a very expensive proposition, and right now the court system is not set up to help. So a year ago, about maybe a year and a half ago, after looking at and asking this question, which I think every jurisdiction should ask this question, what really happens in court to people who we charge with tiny amounts of drugs? And I'm talking about under 1 gram.
Okay.
That's our standard. And a gram is a Splenda pack. It's what an M&M weighs, plain, not peanut. Yeah, it's small.
So basically saying for personal use.
If you're a drug addict, you have a gram to get through the day of heroin or cocaine, methamphetamine. That's about what. So people who wake up and are heavy drug users are committing that crime all day long, 24 hours a day. So we were spending about $3 million a year to prosecute 800 people through the criminal justice system. I talked earlier about warrants. Well, it would take sometimes 3 to 6 months for the police to even send us the case because this was nobody's priority, right? You find somebody with a needle in their pocket. There's a little bit of heroin in the needle. We're going to test that. Oh, it comes back. It's heroin. Now we're going to charge them with a crime. By about a year after the arrest, that person would eventually be picked up on a warrant and put in jail. They'd come before a judge. They would plead guilty to a gross misdemeanor, and there would never be an offer of help. On average, they'd do 15 days of jail, not as punishment, but because they got arrested more than one time because they forgot to come to court. So it was a senseless, meaningless thing, and there was no goal. And here's the thing. Most people, when you talk to rational people, they agree with medical science that substance use disorder is a disease. It's listed in the DSM-5. It's an actual disease, and people can get better, and there are ways that science tells us to help people who have this disease. And there's a lot of people who have the disease who are not in poverty, and they don't bug anybody. There's people who have substance use disorder who live in nice houses in Bellevue and apartments in Kent. But the ones that we see are people who also have extreme poverty as part of their makeup, and they're homeless. And so when they come to the attention of the police, the question is, what are we going to do? What's the best strategy to help them? Now, 9 years ago, I was one of the people who helped start the LEAD program, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, LEAD. It's become a national model. We're struggling right now because we're overwhelmed. What LEAD does is it gives the police officer that extra chance, that option, one more tool on the tool belt. Rather than take you to jail for that little bit of heroin that was in the needle that I found in your pocket, instead, let's call a case manager who can start working with that person and all the things that they need to start to stabilize themselves. And we call a harm reduction format. It helps people do less harm to themselves, thus less harm to the community. Because people who use drugs and need to find drugs every day, they have a collateral damage that they do to the neighborhood. They have to commit crimes to get money. If they're in extreme poverty, they need $100 a day to get their drugs. They're going to do that some way, and it's going to cause harm to the community, frustration to the community, harm to themselves for sure. And so the LEAD program is one strategy that we need to do more of. But the strategy of
But-
putting people in court
Yeah.
was very expensive and really harmful to some of the most marginalized and sick people in our community. So instead, we took that $3 million and went to Burien and have started the LEAD program in Burien. We need more money to hire case managers who are willing to do the kind of work that's really hard work, to go out and make a connection with somebody and to start to help that person.
Right. And, we talked to Pierce County Sheriff Paul Pastor a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about the pendulum swinging way too far. We're trying to make up for wrongs of the past, like the war on drugs, and now we've gone to the point where we're saying it's okay even for these small amounts. And you've probably heard our colleague and friend Dory Monson has said this decriminalization of drugs is an abject failure. What evidence do you have to say, no, that's not correct?
Well, we know that if we invested our money in more programs like the LEAD program, that we would, because that's been studied, and the people who are being helped in that program, there's about 800 people now who are in that program, and they're the most difficult people to help, and it's not like we just help them for 2 months and then they're gone. They're going to be with us for a long time. That they're much less likely to get rearrested, they're much less likely to go to prison, and they save us money over time. It's cheaper to help people than it is to punish them. The punishment that we mete out for people who have a tiny amount of drugs is really just the due process of charging them, having them come to court, having them plead guilty, and then being done with the case, because we haven't invested the necessary money in that level of the court to provide the kind of help that people get. So we're either going to help people or we're going to punish people. Those are strategies we have to choose.
But could there be somewhere in the middle? Because I will tell you, Dan, that any time I've gone into downtown Seattle, I have seen open drug dealing. And I don't feel safe anymore. This is different from 10, 20, 30 years ago.
So let's be clear, drug dealing is a felony that you go to prison for, and we arrest people and we send them to prison.
But there's the sense that we're not, or even open drug use, that's supposed to be illegal as well.
Well, again, it depends on how much you got,
right?
Who you are, and we need to, and I agree that people, for the frustration and the fear, is really people wanting a response.
Right.
And people, they may not want to fill the jails with people who are addicted to drugs, and I hope not, because we did that and it didn't work, and it was really expensive, and it drove a huge wedge between the police and communities that are most impacted by crime. But a strategy shouldn't be just to look the other way, shouldn't be indifference. And so our policy isn't to just walk away and allow that human misery to happen. It really is to galvanize the supports that we have in the community. And I'll say this, I don't think that we've overreacted to this problem. I think we've underreacted to it. I think
how's that?
What we're doing isn't enough. Apparently we're okay with the amount of human misery that's out there. We know how to solve it. We know how to, the solution to homelessness is a home. It's a place for people to live. If they don't like people using if there's no public restrooms, people are going to use the bathroom in the alleyway. If you don't like that, let's provide some service.
Well, what's getting in the way of the different agencies involved, different jurisdictions cooperating to actually come up with a solution that addresses all the things you've talked about that different people have a stake in?
Well, it is a local, it's a municipal, wherever the city is that has it, it's a municipal responsibility, and we haven't had a regional approach. One of the things that's being talked about in the legislature is a regional funding mechanism for King County and Seattle that would raise about $130 million a year, which we desperately need. We're not doing enough, and so people are frustrated. That frustration has to come with a cost. Now, I will prosecute. My office prosecutes almost 7,000 felonies a year. We continue to do that. We're working right now with the Seattle police in that downtown core. When they arrest somebody, for a felony, we will rush file that case within 72 hours and we'll ask for bail to try to hold them in. Because we want to help the police. We're partners with them in this effort. So we're not indifferent to this. But what I'm saying, the only thing I'm pushing back on is don't think that the criminal justice system is your solution to homelessness and drug addiction. It just isn't. We're not built to do that.
Dan, I do want to follow up on one question when it comes to what decisions you're making on charging felonies and conservative filing policies. That's the system of basically choosing one felony charge, even though someone's committed 3 or 4, in order to get a plea deal. I believe in 2018, there was a guy named Nathan Peterson who was found in Black Diamond with a stolen car, stolen gun, drugs, drug paraphernalia, and counterfeit money. He was charged with 1 felony. That was possession of a stolen vehicle rather than the 5 that were recommended by Black Diamond police. He was released, failed to appear in court. and he ended up being shot in a standoff with police officers after committing several crimes. Can you describe the conservative filing policy?
Well, I know that case because we spoke with the Black Diamond officer after he talked to the TV cameras first, and then we said, well, hey, how about calling us if you got a problem with it? And we ended up charging that person also with possession with intent to deliver methamphetamine, which was a prison-based sentence, and he was facing prison time. So, but here's the thing. Every prosecutor has to decide when they get cases from the police, what's the strongest evidence? What can I prove in court? What's the most serious of the things that they sent us? And so and our long-time philosophy in our office, going back 40 years, is to file the most serious cases that we can, and then we'll hold back other cases in case that person wants a trial. If you're going to go to trial, then you're going to face more. Other places will file 10 counts and dismiss 9 for a plea. But either way, you get to the same place. Every system has a disincentive for the defendant to take a trial because we can't do 100% of those cases as trials. So I think we have a very responsible system, and I will stand behind it.
Dan, thank you so much. We have I feel like we just started, and I could keep on going, but really appreciate you stopping by and would love to have you back on again.
Well, congratulations to you, Ursula, and to G, and this is a place we can have an intelligent conversation, so I'd love to come back.
Yeah, thank you so much. And speaking of more conversations, Secretary of State Kim Wyman's going to be joining us live next. You are listening to the G and Ursula Show.